Whispers of a long-buried truth stir the quiet air, unraveling the fragile peace a woman built with her own trembling hands. A powerful man once disappeared without warning, leaving behind only questions, shadows, and a child he never knew existed. Now, fate has twisted back upon itself. Secrets sharpen, old wounds reopen, and the return of a ghost threatens to ignite a storm no heart is prepared to withstand. Before this story begins, tell me, where in the world are you listening from? And what is it about period romances that captures your heart every single time? In the shadowed opulence of New York City's Gilded Age, where gas lamps flickered like dying stars against the relentless march of steel and stone, Elizabeth Thorne stood alone on the windswept balcony of her modest brownstone. It was 1887, and the air carried the sharp tang of coal smoke mingled with the distant clamour of horse-drawn carriages racing toward fortunes unseen. Her hands, calloused from years of quiet toil, clutched the railing as she gazed at the boy playing in the garden below. Samuel, her 7-year-old son, chased a stray leaf with the unbridled joy only a child could muster, his laughter cutting through the evening chill like a blade. Elizabeth's heart twisted. Samuel's eyes, those piercing blue depths, mirrored the man who had vanished without a trace 4 years prior. Alexander Voss, the ruthless railroad magnate whose name once echoed through boardrooms and ballrooms alike, had swept into her life like a tempest. He was no ordinary suitor. Born to old money in Philadelphia, he had clawed his way to empire-building glory, laying tracks across the untamed West. Their romance had been a whirlwind of stolen glances at society galas, whispered promises under crystal chandeliers, and nights spent in the hidden alcoves of grand estates. But then, one fateful dawn, he was gone. No letter, no farewell, just an empty side of the bed and a fortune that seemed to evaporate overnight. She had waited, at first with hope, then with fury, and finally with the steel resolve of a woman forged in abandonment. Whispers spread through the elite circles. Voss had fled to Europe after a scandalous business collapse, or worse, perished in a mining accident out west. Elizabeth, daughter of a fallen merchant, had been cast aside like yesterday's silk gown. Society turned its back, her invitations drying up faster than the ink on a bad contract. Yet she endured. Taking in sewing for the wealthy matrons who once fawned over her, she raised Samuel in this crumbling sanctuary on the edge of Manhattan's glittering chaos. Tonight, as the sun dipped below the jagged skyline, Samuel looked up at her with that innocent smile. "Mama, when's Papa coming home? The other boys at school say their fathers bring stories from faraway places." His voice was small, laced with the curiosity that tugged at her soul. Elizabeth knelt beside him, pulling him into her arms. The scent of fresh earth and his tousled hair enveloped her. "Papa's on a long journey, my love, but he's watching over us, always." Lies, perhaps, but necessary ones. The truth that Alexander had left her pregnant and penniless would shatter the fragile world she had built. Inside, the parlour clock struck 7, its chime a sombre reminder of time's cruel passage. Elizabeth lit the oil lamps, their warm glow casting long shadows across faded wallpaper adorned with once vibrant florals. She had sold her jewels, her lace shawls, everything to keep the roof over their heads. Samuel's education came from borrowed books and her own patient lessons by the fireside. He was bright, her little heir to a legacy unspoken, with a knack for drawing maps of imaginary railroads that mirrored his father's obsessions, but doubt gnawed at her. Rumors had trickled in from distant telegrams. Voss was alive, rebuilding in the shadowed corners of Chicago's stockyards, his fortune rising from the ashes like a phoenix. Why hadn't he returned? Had he forgotten them? Or was there something darker, a debt, a rival, a secret that bound him in chains she couldn't see? As Samuel drifted to sleep that night, clutching a wooden train his mother had carved from scraps, Elizabeth sat by his bedside. Her reflection in the mirror showed a woman transformed. High-necked gown of modest wool, hair pinned severely, eyes hardened by trials. Yet beneath it all burned a fire, unquenched. She would protect him, no matter the cost, raise him to be strong, honorable, everything his father might have been. Little did she know, across the continent in a smoke-filled den of San Francisco's Barbary Coast, Alexander Voss nursed a whiskey and a grudge. Scarred by betrayal, his mind a labyrinth of lost years, he stared at a faded locket, the only token of Elizabeth he carried. "She's gone on without me," he muttered to the empty room, his voice rough from disuse. But fate, that capricious weaver, had other threads in motion. A letter was en route, carried by a trusted courier on the transcontinental rail. It would shatter everything. And in that moment, as the city slept under a canopy of stars, Elizabeth felt an inexplicable chill. The past was stirring, and with it, a storm that would upend their quiet life forever. If this tale of lost love and hidden legacies grips you, hit that subscribe button now and drop a comment below. Tell me your city and country so I can feel connected to every soul tuning in. The journey's just beginning. The morning sun filtered through the lace curtains of Elizabeth's brownstone, casting delicate patterns on the worn oak table where she and Samuel broke their fast. It was a ritual as steadfast as the tides, this simple meal of porridge and fresh bread procured from the corner baker on Bleecker Street. Elizabeth, at 29, moved with the quiet efficiency of one who had learned to stretch every penny and every moment. Her gown, a high-collared affair of dove-grey wool with modest pleats at the skirt, spoke of practicality over ostentation, fabrics chosen for durability, not the silks that once adorned her figure during more carefree days. She pinned her chestnut hair in a neat chignon, a single pearl comb, her only remnant of gentler times, a gift from her late father before his mercantile ventures crumbled under the weight of the panic of 1873. Samuel, with his mop of unruly auburn curls and those telltale blue eyes, spooned his oats with enthusiasm, chattering about the pigeons he'd spied from the window. "Mama, do you think they fly all the way to Papa's adventures?" "Mr. Hargrove says birds carry messages across the seas." At 7, he was a whirlwind of questions, his small frame clad in a starched shirt and knickerbockers mended at the knees, handiwork of Elizabeth's own needle, late into the night. She smiled, though it didn't quite reach her eyes, and ruffled his hair. "Perhaps they do, my darling, but for now, let's focus on your lessons. The world is full of wonders right here in New York." The city outside their door was a beast of contrasts, a glittering facade hiding the grind of immigrant laborers and ambitious tycoons. From their perch on the edge of Greenwich Village, they heard the ceaseless rumble of elevated trains snaking through the air, ferrying the elite to their marble-clad offices on Wall Street, while the poor trudged cobblestone streets slick with yesterday's rain. Elizabeth had once danced in those upper echelons, courted by whispers of marriage to men of means, but Alexander's disappearance had sealed her fate among the middling sort, respectable yet invisible to the Astors and Vanderbilts who dominated the social ledger. After breakfast she cleared the table, her hands moving in practiced rhythm, while Samuel gathered his slate and primer. Their days followed a strict etiquette born of necessity, mornings for education, afternoons for her sewing commissions. Today, a bundle of linens awaited from Mrs. Penelope Whitmore, a widow of moderate fortune whose tongue was as sharp as her demands. Elizabeth had taken the work reluctantly. The Whitmores lived just blocks away, in a finer row house, their parlour aglow with gasoliers and portraits of stern ancestors. "Mind your posture, Elizabeth," Mrs. Whitmore would say during fittings, her lorgnette perched on a beaky nose. "A lady's grace endures, even in reduced circumstances." By 10 o'clock, Samuel was at his desk by the window, scratching out letters under Elizabeth's watchful eye. She sat nearby, her thimble glinting as she mended a gentleman's waistcoat. Fine broadcloth, no doubt destined for some broker's club. The room smelled of beeswax polish and the faint lavender sachet she tucked into drawers to ward off moths. Conversations with Samuel wove through the quiet, tales of Lewis and Clark from a dog-eared book, or the mechanics of steam engines that fascinated them both. "Like Papa's trains," Samuel would say, his voice trailing off, and Elizabeth would steer him gently toward arithmetic, her heart aching with the echo of unspoken truths. Midday brought a visitor. The postman, Mr. Elias, a grizzled veteran of the Civil War with a limp from Gettysburg. He tipped his cap at the door, handing over a thin envelope sealed with red wax. "For Mrs. Thorne," he grunted, his eyes lingering a beat too long on her face. Elizabeth's pulse quickened. Correspondence was rare, mostly bills or the occasional note from her cousin Lydia in Boston, who sent cast-off ribbons for Samuel. This one bore no return address, only a Philadelphia postmark faded at the edges. She waited until Samuel napped, then retreated to the parlor, the envelope trembling in her grasp. The paper crackled as she broke the seal, revealing a single sheet in elegant script. It was from an attorney, Mr. Harlan Graves, representing the estate of one Reginald Voss, Alexander's estranged uncle, dead these 2 years. The words blurred before her eyes. An inheritance, modest but real, tied to a clause demanding proof of kinship. Kinship? Her mind raced. Did they suspect Samuel's existence? The letter hinted at family secrets, a codicil mentioning heirs unforeseen, but offered no clarity. It closed with an invitation to visit the firm's offices in Philadelphia within the fortnight or forfeit the claim. Elizabeth folded the paper, her breath shallow. Philadelphia, cradle of the Voss dynasty, where Alexander had first risen from shadow to spotlight. To go would mean dredging up the past, risking the fragile peace she'd forged. Yet the sum mentioned could secure Samuel's future, tuition at a proper academy, perhaps even a small dowry for her own uncertain path. She glanced at the garden, where autumn leaves swirled like forgotten promises. Rumors of Alexander's survival had always swirled in society whispers, overheard at the market, murmured by seamstresses with ears to the ground. Was this his doing, a lifeline thrown from afar, or a trap woven by those who viewed her as an interloper? As the afternoon waned, a soft knock echoed from the street door. Elizabeth rose, smoothing her apron, and peered through the curtain. There stood a courier, liveried in dark wool, holding a parcel wrapped in oilcloth. His face was unfamiliar, his expression guarded. "Delivery for Mrs. Elizabeth Voss," he said when she opened the door, emphasizing the surname with a knowing tilt. Her blood ran cold. Voss, not Thorne. Who had sent this? And why now, when the ghosts of the past seemed poised to claim what little she had left? Elizabeth's fingers tightened on the doorframe as the courier extended the parcel, its oilcloth wrapping damp from the city's perpetual mist. The man's eyes, sharp beneath his woolen cap, scanned her face with an intensity that made her skin prickle. "Sign here, ma'am," he said, thrusting a ledger forward. His voice carried the clipped accent of the Midwest, far from New York's familiar cadences. She hesitated, the name Voss echoing in her ears like a thunderclap. Thorne was the shield she had forged, her late father's surname, a barrier against the scandal that could swallow them whole. To acknowledge Voss now felt like inviting the wolves to the door. "There's a mistake," she murmured, her voice steady despite the tremor in her chest. "I'm Mrs. Thorne." The courier's brow furrowed, but he didn't retreat. "The instructions are clear, from Mr. Alexander Voss himself, via express from Chicago, personal delivery only." Chicago. The word struck like a match. Alexander, alive and reaching out after 4 silent years. Her mind reeled, visions of him, broad-shouldered in his tailored frock coat, laughing at some private jest during their stolen evenings. But those memories soured quickly, laced with the bitterness of abandonment. Reluctantly, she scrawled her signature, Thorn, not Voss, and took the parcel. It was heavier than expected, solid beneath the cloth. The courier tipped his cap and vanished into the throng of pedestrians on the sidewalk, where vendors hawked chestnuts and newsboys shouted headlines about the latest rail merger. Elizabeth shut the door with a soft click, leaning against it as her breath came in shallow bursts. Samuel's laughter drifted from the garden, innocent and oblivious. In the parlour, she placed the package on the table, its presence an intruder amid the tidy domesticity. The letter from the attorney lay beside it, the inheritance now tangled with this unexpected missive. Her hands, still rough from needlework, unwrapped the oilcloth slowly, revealing a polished wooden box inlaid with brass rails, a motif that screamed Alexander's obsession with his empire. Inside, nestled on velvet, was a locket, identical to the one she had lost years ago, and a folded letter sealed with his monogram. She opened it with trembling fingers. The script was his. Bold, unyielding strokes that matched the man. My dearest Elizabeth, forgive the silence. Circumstances beyond my control bound me in shadows you cannot imagine. Betrayal struck from within my own ranks. Rivals seized my lines, forcing me to vanish like smoke on the wind. I fought to reclaim what was ours, scraping from the stockyards of Chicago to the docks of San Francisco. But you were my anchor, lost to me until now. Word reaches me of our son, Samuel. God, how it tears at me. I never knew. The world conspired to keep it from me, my uncle's meddlers no doubt, guarding the family fortune like dragons. The inheritance Graves mentions is but a thread in a larger web. Come to Philadelphia. Bring the boy. We will claim what's rightfully his. Tracts, lands, a legacy untainted by the vultures. I await you at the Continental Hotel, under the name Harlan Graves Associate. Time is our enemy, society whispers, and my enemies circle. Trust no one but this courier's path. Yours in eternal debt, Alexander. Tears blurred the ink, hot and unbidden. Anger surged next. How dare he command her now, after leaving her to the wolves? She had built this life from scraps, mending not just fabric, but her shattered pride. To drag Samuel into the Voss fold meant exposure, judgment from the very circles that had shunned her. The elite of Philadelphia, with their ironclad codes of propriety, would dissect her story. The unwed mother, the fallen beauty clinging to a ghost. Yet the pull was magnetic. The inheritance could mean security. No more late nights by lamplight, no more dodging Mrs. Whitmore's pitying glances. Samuel deserved more than borrowed books and mended knickers. He carried Voss blood, entitled to the world his father had conquered. That evening, as Samuel supped on potato soup, Elizabeth weighed her words carefully. My love, we may take a journey soon, to a grand city by the river. His eyes lit up, spoon paused mid-air. With Papa, will he show me the trains? She forced a smile, heart twisting. Perhaps, but it's a big decision. Many people will watch us closely there, ladies in fine gowns, gentlemen with stern faces. We must be brave, follow their rules like a dance. Samuel nodded solemnly, mimicking a bow that made her laugh despite the storm brewing. But laughter faded as night fell. She penned a reply by candlelight, her quill scratching accusations and pleas in equal measure. Send it, or burn it, and cling to her solitude. Dawn brought the first obstacle, a knock, louder this time. Mrs. Whitmore stood on the stoop, her bombazine dress rustling like dry leaves. A copy of the New York Herald clutched in her gloved hand. Elizabeth, dear, have you seen this? She thrust the paper forward, her lorgnette magnifying eyes alight with gossip. The headline screamed, Voss Eyre hunt, scandalous claim surfaces in Philadelphia. Below, a vague account of the attorney's letter, her name hinted at in shadowed terms. A certain Mrs. T of New York. Whispers of bastardy, of fortunes contested. Elizabeth's stomach plummeted. How had it leaked so fast? Graves' office, no doubt, or some clerk's loose tongue. Mrs. Whitmore clucked her tongue. The society's abuzz. If you're entangled, well, my commissions may dry up. Propriety, you know. The veto was implicit, the slander already weaving its web. Elizabeth's cheeks burned. Refusal now meant isolation. Her sewing trade crumbling under scandal's weight. Acceptance. It thrust her into a new world of protocols, chaperoned travels, vetted introductions, the unyielding gaze of the Voss kin who viewed outsiders as threats. By noon, a telegram arrived from Lydia in Boston. Heard rumors. Beware Voss traps. Allies scarce. Mentors like Lydia warned of the family's ruthlessness. Antagonists lurked in every shadow. Alexander's uncle's ghost, perhaps, or rival magnates hungry for the inheritance. Elizabeth stared at the box, the locket cool against her palm. Samuel's future hung in the balance. With a deep breath, she sealed her response, acceptance on her terms. The train to Philadelphia left at dawn the next day, a forced choice that shattered her quiet world. As the carriage rattled toward the station 2 days later, Samuel clutching his wooden train, she wondered if this rupture would heal old wounds or carve new ones. But in the distance, the rails gleamed like a promise or a noose tightening. The rhythmic clatter of iron wheels on steel rails lulled Samuel to sleep against Elizabeth's shoulder as the train hurtled toward Philadelphia. She stared out the soot-streaked window, the Hudson River giving way to rolling Pennsylvania hills, dusted with early frost. It was her first journey in years, the velvet-upholstered Pullman car, a stark reminder of luxuries long forsaken. Plush seats, a steward offering tea from a silver service, the faint scent of polished leather mingling with pipe smoke from the gentleman's lounge. Elizabeth had dressed carefully, a travelling suit of navy bombazine, its fitted bodice buttoned to the throat, the skirt full but practical for the confines of the compartment. A simple bonnet shielded her face, and around her neck hung the locket from Alexander's parcel, its weight a constant pull against her resolve. They arrived at Broad Street Station amid the bustle of porters and steam whistles, the air thick with coal dust and the cries of vendors. A hired carriage waited, arranged by the courier's note, discreet, unmarked. Elizabeth's heart pounded as they rattled through the city's orderly grid, past the grand facades of Chestnut Street where gas lamps awaited dusk. Philadelphia, with its red brick solidity and Quaker restraint, felt worlds apart from New York's frenetic pulse. Here the Voss legacy loomed in every cornerstone. Banks named for the family, rail depots etched with their insignia. The Continental Hotel rose like a bastion on 9th Street, its marble lobby echoing with the murmur of clerks and the rustle of crinolines. Elizabeth checked in under her maiden name, requesting adjoining rooms for propriety's sake. Samuel's eyes widened at the crystal chandeliers and potted palms, but she hushed his exclamations, guiding him upstairs with a firm hand. "Remember our dance, love." Steps measured, voices soft. That afternoon brought the first test, a summons to tea at the offices of Harlan Graves, Esquire. The attorney, a wiry man in his 50s with mutton chops and a pinstriped vest, received them in a panelled chamber overlooking Independence Square. Gas jets flickered in wall sconces, casting warm light on leather-bound ledgers and a brass spittoon. Graves peered over his spectacles, his gaze lingering on Samuel with clinical interest. "Mrs. Thorne, or should I say Voss," he began, his tone laced with the precision of a man who passed wills for a living. "The codicil is clear. Proof of lineage for the boy's claim. A birth record, perhaps, or testimony from the father himself." Elizabeth's fingers tightened on her reticule. "Mr. Voss and I were privately wed." 4 years passed. The records are in New York, but Samuel's features speak for themselves. She lifted the boy's chin gently, those blue eyes mirroring the Voss portraits lining the walls. Stern patriarchs in frock coats, their empires forged in steel and speculation. Graves nodded curtly, but doubt shadowed his face. The family council insists on formality. Tea awaits in the anteroom with select members, a courtesy call to gauge suitability. Suitability. The word stung like a veiled barb. As they rose, a door creaked open, admitting 3 figures. An elderly aunt, Mrs. Evelyn Hargrove, her silver hair coiled under a lace cap, a cousin, Nathaniel Voss, broad and bluff in a checkered suit, and a distant relation, Miss Clara Beaumont, whose gown of emerald silk whispered of old money's unyielding grip. The anteroom was a semi-public stage, doors ajar to the corridor where clerks might overhear. A maid poured Darjeeling from a porcelain pot, the steam curling like secrets. Samuel fidgeted with his napkin, but Elizabeth schooled her posture, spine straight as a ruler. "Charmed to meet kin," she said, her voice even, though her pulse raced. Mrs. Hargrove's eyes narrowed behind her fan. "Charmed indeed. We've heard tales from New York, whispers of irregularity. One must wonder at the haste of such unions." The words landed softly, but the implications sliced. Irregularity, a polite synonym for scandal. Class friction crackled in the air. The Vosses inherited wealth, a fortress against interlopers like her. Daughter of a bankrupt trader, Nathaniel chuckled, a low rumble, but his eyes were cold. The boy's a fine lad. Takes after Alexander, no doubt, but legacies demand scrutiny. He leaned forward, offering Samuel a biscuit, a micro-gesture of acceptance. Or was it pity? Miss Beaumont said nothing, her gloved fingers tracing the rim of her cup, but her silence weighed heavy, a judgment unspoken. Elizabeth met their stares, her chin lifting. Scrutiny I welcome, for Samuel's sake. In that moment, across the room, a shadow shifted in the doorway, a figure cloaked in a greatcoat watching. The antagonist's first glimpse, Percival Langford, Alexander's former partner turned rival. His face gaunt under a bowler hat, eyes like flint. He had sabotaged Voss years ago, seizing rail contracts in a web of bribes and forged deeds. Now he lurked, gauging the threat to his ill-gotten gains. As tea concluded, Graves cleared his throat. "The council will deliberate. Return tomorrow for the reading." Relief flickered, but so did rejection's edge, their nods polite yet distant, as if she were a curiosity, not kin. Back at the hotel, Elizabeth unpacked the symbolic brooch from Alexander's box, a gold rail pin, engraved with their initials intertwined. She fastened it to Samuel's collar, a talisman starting its arc. "For luck, my brave one." He beamed, touching it with wonder. Evening brought a small advance. A note slipped under the door. "Meet me in the garden at 9, discreetly. A." Heart hammering, Elizabeth left Samuel with the chambermaid and descended to the shadowed hotel gardens where lanterns swayed in the breeze. Alexander waited by a fountain, his frame leaner, scarred by hardship, a jagged line across his cheek from some frontier brawl. His frock coat hung loose, but his eyes burned with the old fire. "Elizabeth." The word was a whisper, laced with regret. He stepped closer, but she held up a hand. "You left us to ruin." Her voice cracked, but she held his gaze. He nodded, pain etching deeper lines. "I thought it protected you. Langford's men hunted me, but seeing you, our son." His fingers brushed hers as he offered a handkerchief for her unshed tears, a fleeting touch, electric in the chill air. They shared a silence, the fountain's murmur bridging years of absence. Hope stirred, fragile as a new rail spike. Yet as they parted, a rustle in the hedges, Langford's shadow retreating, his presence a silent vow of interference. The next morning, a society column in the Philadelphia Inquirer carried a sly note. Mystery heiress graces Voss tea. Whispers of contested claims stir old feuds. Visible consequence rippled outward. Invitations withheld. Eyes turning sharper. Elizabeth clutched the brooch, steeling for the fray ahead. The dance had only begun, and the steps grew treacherous. Rain lashed the windows of the Continental Hotel's private parlor, turning the Philadelphia afternoon into a blurred watercolor of gray skies and slick cobblestones. Elizabeth paced the Persian rug, her traveling suit exchanged for a simple afternoon gown of soft muslin, its high neckline edged with modest lace. Samuel dozed on a velvet settee nearby, exhausted from the morning scrutiny at Graves' office, his small chest rising and falling in rhythm with the storm's fury. The room, with its heavy oak paneling and flickering gas lamps, felt like a cocoon, isolated, intimate, yet charged with the weight of unspoken histories. Alexander had arrived unannounced an hour earlier, his greatcoat dripping from the downpour as he slipped through the service entrance to avoid prying eyes. Now he stood by the hearth, warming his hands over the low fire, his broad frame casting long shadows. The scar on his cheek caught the light, a stark reminder of the wild years that had reshaped him. Gone was the polished magnate of Gala's past. In his place, a man etched by hardship, his frock coat threadbare at the cuffs, eyes shadowed with a guilt that hung heavier than the humid air. "I never meant to leave you like that," he said finally, his voice low, roughened by disuse and regret. He turned to face her, the firelight dancing in his blue eyes so like Samuel's that Elizabeth's breath caught. Langford. He didn't just steal my contracts. He spread lies, forged documents to paint me as a fraud. I fled to protect you, to draw the hounds away. But I failed. Every night in those godforsaken camps, I saw your face. Elizabeth stopped pacing, her hands clasping the locket at her throat, the one he'd sent, now a bridge between them. She wanted to lash out, to demand why no word had come, why she'd borne the whispers alone. Instead, she sank into an armchair, the storm outside mirroring the tempest within. "You vanished, Alexander. I waited months, then years. Society branded me a fool, a cast-off. And Samuel, he asks for you still, with that innocent faith I can't shatter." He crossed the room in 2 strides, kneeling before her, close enough that she could smell the rain on his wool and the faint trace of pipe tobacco. But he didn't touch her, not yet. "Tell me about him. Our boy." His voice cracked on the word, vulnerability stripping away the tycoon's armor. She glanced at Samuel, then back, her resolve softening. "He's clever like you, draws railroads in the dirt, dreams of tracks stretching to the stars, but he's gentle too, helps the neighbor's widow with her coal. I taught him that, raised him on stories of your adventures, twisted them into heroes' tales to fill the silence you left." Alexander's gaze dropped, shame etching deeper lines. He reached into his pocket, pulling out a small, leather-bound journal, its pages yellowed and frayed. It's all I had of you, sketches I made in the dark, plans for the life we almost built." He opened it, revealing charcoal drawings, her profile from memory, a nursery sketched with cribs and toy engines, even a crude map of a family estate far from the city's grind. The anchor object lay bare his layers, the ruthless magnate who had grieved in secret, duty-bound to rebuild before returning, guilt chaining him longer than any rival's scheme. Elizabeth took the journal, her fingers brushing his. The contact sent a spark through her, warming the chill of resentment. She traced a sketch, tears pricking her eyes. "You carried this? Through it all?" "Every mile," he whispered. "I thought you'd moved on, found someone steady. It would have been justice, but learning of Samuel, it broke me anew." He's my heir, Elizabeth, not just to rails and fortunes, but to whatever good I can salvage." The storm raged louder, thunder rumbling like an approaching locomotive, confining them further in this fragile truce. Samuel stirred, murmuring in his sleep, and Alexander rose quietly to cover him with a throw. The gesture, simple and paternal, shifted something deep within her, a tacit promise in the way he lingered, watching the boy with wonder. Trust bloomed, tentative, like the first green after winter. No grand declarations, just the quiet understanding that they were allies now, bound by blood and loss. As the rain eased to a drizzle, Alexander stood, his hand grazing her shoulder, a fleeting touch that lingered in the air between them. "We'll face the council together. For him, I swear it." Hope flickered, bright and new. But then a sharp knock shattered the moment. The chambermaid entered, pale-faced, holding a sealed note on a silver tray. "For Mr. Voss, sir. Delivered by a boy from the street. Insisted it was urgent." Alexander snatched it, breaking the plain wax. His face darkened as he read. "Langford," he growled. "He sent word to the council, claims Samuel's birth is fabricated, a ploy to seize the inheritance. Spies have been watching us since we arrived." Elizabeth's stomach twisted, the warmth evaporating like mist. The antagonist's move, a whispered espionage, a poisoned message, lowered the tide, pulling them back into peril. Alexander crumpled the note, fire returning to his eyes. "He won't win, but we move carefully now." The intimacy fractured, replaced by the cold edge of battle as thunder rolled once more in the distance. The gas lamps along Walnut Street sputtered to life as dusk settled over Philadelphia, their flames dancing like wary sentinels in the gathering fog. Elizabeth hurried through the hotel's side entrance, her skirts whispering against the marble steps, Samuel's hand clutched firmly in hers. The council's deliberations stretched into evening, and Alexander had insisted on escorting them back, his presence a shield against the shadows that seemed to lengthen with every step. But the note from Langford burned in her mind, a poison seeping through their fragile reunion. Espionage, lies about Samuel's birth. The words twisted like barbed wire, pulling at the trust they'd only just begun to mend. They reached the Continental's lobby, a cavern of polished brass and hushed conversations, where gentlemen in bowlers debated stock prices over cigars. Alexander's jaw tightened as he scanned the crowd, his hand hovering near Elizabeth's elbow, a protective gesture that felt both comforting and confining. "Stay close," he murmured. Langford's men could be anywhere. That note was no idle threat. Samuel tugged at her glove, his blue eyes wide with the thrill of the grand space. "Is this like Papa's hotels in the stories, Mama, with secret passages?" She forced a smile, kneeling to his level. "Perhaps, love, but tonight we rest. No adventures yet." Her voice steadied him, but inside doubt churned. The council's tea had been a gauntlet of veiled barbs. Now this. Could she trust Alexander fully after years of silence? His journal, those sketches, they humanized him, yes. But actions spoke louder and his enemies circled like vultures scenting weakness. A clerk approached. His face flushed under the gaslight. "Mrs. Thorne, a message for you and the gentleman." He extended a silver tray, bearing an envelope sealed with the Voss family crest. Eagle wings spread over crossed rails. Alexander snatched it, breaking the wax with a sharp crack. His eyes narrowed as he read, color draining from his scarred cheek. "What is it?" Elizabeth whispered, pulling Samuel behind her skirts. "Langford's strike," Alexander growled, crumpling the paper. "He's gone to the council with evidence. Forged ledgers claiming I abandoned you to dodge debts. Says Samuel's no heir, just a fabrication to swindle the estate. And worse, he's exposed our meeting in the garden, calls it an illicit rendezvous, dragging your name through the mud." The lobby seemed to tilt. Elizabeth's cheeks burned, the weight of public scrutiny crashing down. Frontal attack indeed, sabotage dressed as propriety. Langford, that gaunt viper from Alexander's past, had risen from the stockyard shadows, his influence now poisoning the very air of Philadelphia's elite. Whispers rippled through the room already, heads turned, fans fluttering like judgments unspoken. She snatched the note, scanning the elegant script laced with venom. This ruins everything. The inheritance, Samuel's claim, gone. And my reputation? They'll paint me as the scheming adventuress, unfit for society. Her voice broke, the fall from tentative acceptance to isolation hitting like a derailment. No more measured dances. Now, exile loomed, her modest world in New York tainted by cross-country scandal. Alexander's fist clenched, knuckles white. I won't let him. We'll counter. But a commotion erupted at the entrance. Doors swung wide, admitting a cluster of Voss kin, Mrs. Hargrove, her lace cap askew in haste. Nathaniel, red-faced and bellowing, and behind them the attorney Graves clutching a sheaf of papers. Langford slunk in their wake, his bowler low, a smirk curling his thin lips like smoke from a faulty engine. "Scandal upon scandal," Mrs. Hargrove declared, her voice slicing the hush. "Mr. Langford brings irrefutable proof. Voss, you've dragged this family into disrepute, fleeing debts, consorting in shadows, and you, madam—" Her gaze pinned Elizabeth like a specimen. "Parading a child of dubious origin. The council revokes any claim, leave Philadelphia by dawn, or face the law's full weight on fraud." Gasps echoed. Onlookers pressed closer, a semi-public pillory. Elizabeth's stomach plummeted, the tangible blow landed. Loss of support, alliances shattered. Nathaniel avoided her eyes, his earlier warmth curdled into discomfort. Even Graves shifted uneasily, murmuring of legal threats, injunctions, asset seizures, though never aimed at her directly. The balance ruptured, her status plummeting from potential kin to pariah. Samuel whimpered, burying his face in her skirts. Alexander stepped forward, towering over Langford. "Lies! Those ledgers are forgeries. I built this empire while you scavenged scraps. Elizabeth is my wife in all but paper. Samuel, my blood." Langford chuckled, low and oily. "Proof, Voss. Your vanishing act speaks volumes. The council sees clearly now." He turned to the crowd, voice rising. "A magnate's folly, gentlemen. Beware the wolves in wool." The assault broke them, emotionally at least. Alexander's hand found Elizabeth's, squeezing once, fierce and desperate, but the damage seeped deep. Trust fractured under the onslaught, his guilt flaring anew. "I brought this on you," he muttered, voice raw. "Langford's blackmail. It ends our chance here. No return now. The moment sealed it. An action irreversible, thrusting them into open war." Elizabeth lifted her chin, shielding Samuel as porters averted their gazes. Isolation wrapped around her like fog. Friends in New York would hear soon, her sewing commissions vanishing like mist. But fire kindled in her chest, indignation at Langford's smug triumph, the vulture feasting on their pain. As the kin retreated, murmuring of disinheritance, Alexander pulled her aside into a shadowed alcove. "We fight from afar. I'll draw him out, expose the bribes that started this. But you, take Samuel home. It's not safe." Separation clawed at her. "No, we face this together." Yet his eyes, haunted, pleaded otherwise. The ultimatum hung unspoken, his retreat into the fray, her exile to protect the boy. Thunder rumbled outside, echoing the storm within. Langford's shadow lingered at the door, watching. The point of no return had arrived, and with it, a chasm widening between them. Elizabeth clutched the locket, heart pounding. What price would victory demand now? The fog clung to Philadelphia's streets like a shroud as Elizabeth slipped from the Continental Hotel under cover of night, Samuel bundled in her arms against the chill. Alexander's words echoed in her ears, his retreat into the fray, her exile to shield the boy, but she couldn't bear the fracture. Not after the lobby's humiliation, Langford's oily smirk etching itself into her memory like acid on steel. The carriage rattled toward a modest boarding house on the Schuylkill's edge, a temporary haven arranged by a discreet contact from Graves' office. There, in a cramped room lit by a single oil lamp, she tucked Samuel into bed, his small form exhausted from the day's chaos. Sleep evaded her. The locket at her throat felt heavier now, a symbol twisted by doubt. Alexander's journal lay open on the table, its sketches mocking her with visions of a life stolen. But amid the drawings, a loose page fluttered free, a faded receipt, tucked like a forgotten secret. Her fingers trembled as she unfolded it. Not a mere bill, but a fragment of ledger, dates from 4 years past, scrawled in Langford's hand, detailing bribes to rail inspectors, sums diverted from Voss contracts. "Manipulation," she whispered, pulse quickening. This was the structural truth, a plot to bankrupt Alexander, force his flight, and seize the empire piecemeal. Dawn broke grey and relentless. Elizabeth rose, steeling herself. No more waiting in shadows. She penned a letter to the Philadelphia Inquirer, her quill flying across foolscap in measured fury. "To the esteemed editors," it began, "the Voss inheritance is no mere family squabble, but a web of deceit spun by Percival Langford, who profited from forgery and betrayal." She enclosed the ledger fragment, anonymous yet pointed, her words a public pronunciamento that reframed the scandal. Not her indiscretion, but Langford's greed. Mailed by a street boy for a nickel, it carried the weight of her agency, a seamstress's daughter challenging tycoons, altering perceptions from pariah to whistleblower. By midday, the city's pulse quickened. Copies of the Inquirer hit newsstands. The letter splashed across society pages. Mystery voice exposes rail rivals' schemes. Whispers spread through coffee houses and ladies' salons, indignation building like steam in a boiler. Langford's name, once whispered with envy, now dripped with scorn. The vulture who had preyed on a loyal magnate, orphaned a child, shamed a woman for his gain. Elizabeth felt the shift, a peak of hope as allies emerged, a former Voss clerk testifying via affidavit to the bribes. An old portrait from the family vault showing Alexander and Langford in younger days, trust betrayed. She sought Alexander at a shadowed tavern near the rail yards, where locomotives huffed like beasts in repose. He waited in a back booth, face gaunt under the low-beamed ceiling, nursing black coffee from a tin mug. The air smelled of coal and stale ale, far from the Continental's polish. "You saw the paper?" she asked, sliding into the seat opposite, her bonnet discarded to reveal hair loosened by resolve. He nodded, eyes widening with a mix of awe and fear. "Elizabeth, this could destroy him, but it paints a target on you." Not coldness, she saw now. Guilt had armored him, duty to reclaim their future chaining his heart. He reached across the scarred table, his calloused hand covering hers. "I pushed you away to protect you, thought my failures would taint you both, but you fought alone, built strength I envy." The touch anchored her, trust weaving tighter than passion's fleeting spark. "We're in this as equals," she said softly, squeezing back. "For Samuel. For us." A valley loomed immediately. A messenger burst in, breathless, waving a telegram. Langford's retort, a countersuit filed, accusing her of libel, demanding Samuel's sequestration as evidence in the fraud. Danger escalated, his response a greater threat, claws out to silence her. Yet hope surged again. Elizabeth rallied, drafting a social initiative, a petition to the Railmen's Union, circulated among workers who'd suffered Langford's cuts. Signatures poured in. Blacksmiths, engineers, widows left destitute. Her proactive stand humanized her, reframing Alexander too. from vanished rogue to victim of betrayal. Society's tide turned, invitations trickled to the boarding house, not from kin, but reformers and journalists hungry for truth. Indignation peaked that evening in a clandestine meeting at the Union Hall, gaslights flaring on walls papered with manifestos. Elizabeth addressed the crowd, voice steady amid tobacco haze. Langford didn't just steal rails, he stole families, futures. Look at this diary. She held aloft Alexander's journal, pages open to entries detailing the sabotage, dates of forged deeds, names of bribed officials. Testimony followed, a whistleblower porter, scarred by a Langford accident, corroborating every line. The room erupted, fists pounding tables, cries of "Justice for Voss" echoing like thunder. Langford's villainy crystallized. The smug predator who'd watched a woman raise his rival's heir alone, now exposed as the architect of their ruin. Alexander stood beside her, shoulder brushing hers in contained solidarity. "You've given me back my fight," he murmured, eyes meeting hers with quiet fire. No grand embrace, just the warmth of shared purpose, trust blooming amid the storm. But Langford struck back swiftly. A brick through the boarding house window that night, shattered glass and peace, a note tied to it, "Withdraw or the boy pays." The valley deepened, threat coiling tighter. Elizabeth clutched Samuel close, heart racing as Alexander vowed, "We'll end this publicly." Word arrived at dawn. A summons to the Grand Assembly at the Academy of Music, a decisive gathering of rail barons and society elite, where claims would clash under crystal chandeliers. The hook was set, confrontation awaited, and with it, the battle's turning point. The grand auditorium of the Academy of Music shimmered under a canopy of crystal chandeliers, their gas flames casting a golden haze over the sea of silk and satin. Philadelphia's elite had gathered in force, rail barons in crisp tailcoats, their wives fanned by ostrich plumes, the air thick with the scent of orchids and imported perfume. It was 1887, and the assembly pulsed with the undercurrent of empire, fortunes forged in steel, now tested in the spotlight of scandal. Elizabeth stood at the edge of the box seats, her gown a understated navy taffeta with a high collar and subtle lace trim, chosen for poise rather than parade. Samuel clung to her side, wide-eyed at the spectacle, his small hand warm in hers. Alexander flanked them, his frock coat mended but pressed, the scar on his cheek a badge of battles past. The stage below hosted the evening's true drama, not the opera program, but the Voss inheritance hearing, elevated to public forum by Langford's machinations. Whispers rippled through the crowd like wind through boxwood hedges, the mystery heiress, the vanished magnate, the rival's web of deceit. Elizabeth's heart hammered, but she held her chin high, the locket at her throat a steady weight. This was their moral crossroads, expose the truth or slink away into obscurity. For Samuel, for the legacy he'd been denied, there was no turning back. The curtain parted with a hush, revealing a raised dais where the Voss Council presided, Mrs. Hargrove, stern in black bombazine, Nathaniel, fidgeting with his watch fob, and Graves, spectacles glinting like judgment. Langford ascended first, gaunt and triumphant in a charcoal suit, clutching a leather dossier under his arm. His eyes swept the audience, landing on Elizabeth with a predator's gleam. "Ladies and gentlemen," he intoned, voice oily as axle grease, "tonight we unmask the fraud at our gates. Alexander Voss fled debts 4 years past, leaving chaos in his wake. This woman," he gestured sharply at Elizabeth, "and her child are pawns in his scheme, a fabricated claim to siphon the estate." Gasps echoed. He flung open the dossier, revealing sheaves of papers, a forged marriage certificate, yellowed and doctored. Affidavits from bought witnesses claiming Elizabeth's adventurous past in New York saloons. Even a letter penned in a mimic of Alexander's hand, confessing abandonment for vice. "See here," Langford crowed, holding aloft the false epistle. Voss admits it all. And the boy, no blood tie, mere coincidence of blue eyes. I've witnesses, reputable men, who'll swear the child's origins lie in shadows unfit for Voss gold. The crowd murmured, fans snapping shut like verdicts. Mrs. Hargrove leaned forward, her lace cap quivering. Outrageous! If proven, the claim dissolves. Mr. Langford, your evidence. A bought witness, a weaselly clerk in a threadbare vest, took the stand, swearing to overhear Elizabeth's boasts of a sham union. Applause trickled from Langford's allies, the sabotage landing like a derailment. Reputations shredded, the community poised to cast them out. Elizabeth's knees weakened. This was the final blow, designed to bury them under lies. Samuel whimpered, and she pulled him close, whispering, "Brave now, love. The truth rides the rails." Alexander's hand tensed on the balustrade, but Elizabeth stepped forward first, her voice cutting through the din like a locomotive whistle. "Lies built on bribes," she declared, ascending the dais unbidden, the crowd falling silent. "Percival Langford didn't just forge papers, he forged ruin. 4 years ago, he sabotaged Mr. Voss's lines, diverting funds to his own pockets. I hold proof." She drew Alexander's journal from her reticule, its pages open to the ledger fragment and dated entries. "This diary chronicles it all. Bribes to inspectors on the 20th of March, 1883. Forged deeds signed in Langford's hand. And here..." She produced the petition, rolled tight, signatures from rail workers gleaming under the lights, testimony from those he wronged. Widows bankrupted, families torn. Not Voss, but Langford, the true thief. Murmurs swelled to a roar. A key witness emerged from the wings, a grizzled engineer, Langford's former foreman, his overalls starched for the occasion. "I saw it," he boomed, voice gravelly from years on the tracks. "Langford paid me to lie about Voss's safety records, pocketed thousands while men died in shoddy cars. This woman speaks truth. She's fought for us all." The tide turned. Langford blanched, dossier trembling. "Slander! These are plants!" But Nathaniel rose, face thunderous. "Enough. We've seen the bribes in your own ledgers, slipped to us anonymously." Graves nodded, unfurling a subpoena. "Mr. Langford, your accounts don't lie. Embezzlement, fraud. The council revokes your partnerships. Exile from Philadelphia's rails, or face the courts." The auditorium erupted, cheers crashing like waves, fists pounding seats. Langford staggered back, face ashen, his empire crumbling under the weight of exposed greed. The community reframed Elizabeth in an instant, from shamed outsider to lion-hearted defender, her quiet strength earning nods of respect, even from Mrs. Hargrove, who murmured, "Well fought, madam." Alexander joined her on the dais, his arm brushing hers in silent solidarity, pride etching his features. Samuel beamed up at them, the air no longer hidden. Victory surged, cathartic and sweet, a peak of euphoria washing away years of shadows. Langford slunk from the stage, tail between his legs, his humiliation public and profound. The assembly dissolved into applause, toasts raised to the Voss restoration. If this twist of fate has you cheering, hit that subscribe button right now to catch every thrilling tale from the channel. No story like this gets left behind. In the quiet aftermath, as the chandeliers dimmed and the crowd filtered into the night, Elizabeth and Alexander lingered in the emptying box. Samuel slept against her shoulder, the locket glinting in the fading light. No words passed between them, just a shared glance, hands entwining briefly over the boy's head. A tacit vow, deeper than oaths. Together, through storm or steel, their future forged anew. But in the distance, a faint telegraph click echoed from the lobby, a message arriving hinting at threads yet to unravel. The morning after the assembly dawned crisp and clear over Philadelphia, the Schuylkill River glittering like a ribbon of polished silver under the autumn sun. Elizabeth stepped from the boarding house onto the dew-kissed street, Samuel skipping ahead with a vigor that mirrored the city's renewed pulse. The Enquirer's headlines screamed vindication. Langford's empire derails. Voss Eyre triumphs amid revelations of fraud. Copies sold out by breakfast, newsboys hollering the tale from every corner. Whispers that had once cut like knives now carried admiration. The elite's tide fully turned. Elizabeth's simple wool gown, with its fitted bodice and full skirts, felt lighter today, no longer a shield, but a banner of quiet victory. Alexander waited at the corner, his carriage pulled by a pair of matched bays, the Voss crest discreetly etched on the door. He had spent the night unraveling the final threads at Graves's office, his face lined with fatigue, but eyes alight with purpose. "It's done," he said as she approached, helping Samuel up with the father's steady hand. The council ratified Samuel's claim at first light. Langford sanctioned, exiled from all rail ventures east of the Mississippi, his assets seized for restitution, no more shadows for him. She nodded, climbing in beside him, the leather seats creaking softly. The consequence landed heavy on their old foe. Prestige shattered, rights stripped, his gaunt frame no doubt slinking toward some forgotten outpost in the Dakotas. Fortune reduced to whispers and warrants. No trial for Elizabeth or Alexander, just justice served through ledgers and oaths, the law's gavel falling on perjury alone. Side players found their fates too. The Weasley clerk, bought witness, vanished into obscurity, his testimony recanted under oath. The grizzled engineer, rewarded with a foreman post on Voss lines, even Mrs. Hargrove, repositioned from skeptic to reluctant ally, sending a basket of preserves with a note of gracious concession. Nathaniel, ever the opportunist, pledged loyalty, his bluff demeanor now a bulwark for the family's revival. The carriage rolled toward the Voss family vault on Chestnut Street, a red brick edifice flanked by iron lanterns. Inside, amid oak-paneled walls and the scent of aged vellum, Graves awaited with the inheritance documents, deeds to western tracts, bonds yielding a steady flow, enough to rebuild tenfold. But Elizabeth's gaze fixed on a smaller parcel, a plain gold band, unadorned, forged fresh from a Philadelphia smith. No heirlooms tainted by Langford's schemes, no jewels from fractured pasts. Alexander took it, his calloused fingers steady as he slipped it onto hers in the vault's hushed light. "By choice," he murmured, voice rough with emotion. "Equals, from this day. No commands, no ghosts." She met his eyes, the ring cool against her skin, sealing their bond, not as magnate and muse, but partners forged in fire. Samuel watched, clutching the rail brooch now pinned proudly to his jacket. The symbolic object evolved from talisman to heirloom. Their transformation shone clear. Alexander's voice, once barked in boardrooms, now tempered with compassion, speaking of fair wages for railmen. Elizabeth's leadership, quiet no more, envisioning a legacy beyond gold. A free school for orphans of the tracks, libraries stocked with maps and tales of the West. Social works to lift the widows Langford had crushed. By noon, they departed for New York, the transcontinental rails humming beneath them like a heartbeat restored. The journey blurred in conversation. Plans for the Brownstones' renewal, Samuel's academy enrollment, a nursery sketched anew from Alexander's journal. No erotic blaze, just the warmth of shared horizons. His hand on hers across the compartment, silences filled with possibility. They arrived as dusk painted Manhattan's skyline in amber, the elevated train's clamor welcoming them home. The Brownstones stood waiting, its garden alive with spring bulbs Elizabeth had planted in defiance. Inside, oil lamps flickered to life, casting glow on walls soon to be repapered in fresh florals. Samuel dashed to his maps, chattering of engines, while Alexander knelt to carve another wooden train, father and son, legacy in motion. That evening, as stars pricked the velvet sky, they stepped onto the balcony. Alexander drew Elizabeth close, his lips brushing hers in a kiss born of love, not loss, soft, enduring, a promise etched in the city's distant roar. Below, Samuel played, his laughter rising like smoke from a new forged engine. The future stretched wide, rails to conquer, schools to build, a family unbound. Yet as they lingered, a courier rapped at the door below, a letter from San Francisco, sealed with an unfamiliar crest. An offer from the coastlines, Alexander read later, brow furrowing slightly. They seek partnership, but mention old names. A soft hook, threads lingering in the west. Elizabeth smiled, squeezing his hand. Whatever came, they faced it together, transformed, triumphant, the Gilded Age's storm finally stilled. 10 years had woven their threads through the fabric of Elizabeth and Alexander Voss's lives, transforming the raw edges of survival into a tapestry of quiet triumph. It was 1897 now, and the brownstone on the edge of Greenwich Village stood renewed, its facade repointed with fresh brick, ivy climbing the wrought-iron balconies like loyal sentinels. The Gilded Age's clamour had evolved. Elevated trains roared louder, electric trolleys sparked along Broadway, but here in their sanctuary, time moved at a gentler pace, measured by family laughter rather than stock tickers. Elizabeth, at 39, moved through the sunlit parlour with the grace of a woman who had claimed her place. Her gown of soft lavender wool, with its leg of mutton sleeves and modest corseting, spoke of comfort earned, not constraint imposed. Chestnut hair, streaked with the faintest silver, was pinned loosely, a few tendrils framing eyes that held wisdom's depth. She paused by the window, watching Samuel, now 17, tall and broad-shouldered like his father, tinker with a model locomotive in the garden. He had grown into a young man of sharp intellect, his blue eyes keen as he sketched improvements to steam valves, dreaming of innovations that would stretch rails across uncharted territories. Their marriage, formalized in a simple ceremony at the Philadelphia Quaker Meeting House 2 years after the assembly, had blossomed without the weight of old scandals. No grand society wedding, just vows exchanged under plain wooden beams, with Nathaniel as witness and Mrs. Hargrove offering a grudging nod from the back pew. Alexander had knelt before her that day, the plain gold band slipping onto her finger as a symbol of equals, not empires. Love had endured, deepening like roots in fertile soil, nights spent poring over blueprints by oil lamps that had given way to gas, his hand finding hers in silent affirmation. They had 2 more children now, Clara, 9, with Elizabeth's curls and a penchant for poetry, and little James, 5, whose boundless energy echoed Samuel's boyhood romps. Alexander emerged from his study, the room now a hub of maps and ledgers, walls lined with books on engineering and ethics, volumes Elizabeth had insisted upon to balance profit with purpose. At 45, he carried the years with a rugged vitality, the scar on his cheek faded to a thin line, his frock coat traded for a vested suit of fine serge. The railroad empire he reclaimed had expanded ethically, lines threading through the Midwest with fair wages for workers, depots built with family quarters for railmen's kin. No more shadows of betrayal. Langford's exile had been total, his name a cautionary tale in boardrooms. He paid dearly, reduced to scraping in dusty Dakota towns, his fortune squandered on failed ventures, dying penniless in a boarding house fever 5 years back, whispers of regret on his lips. The weaselly clerk met a similar end, drowned in debts. Even distant Voss kin who sided with him found invitations scarce, their prestige eroded like weathered ties. "Mama, look!" Samuel called, holding up his prototype. Steam hissing faintly from a makeshift boiler. Elizabeth smiled, stepping out to join them, the scent of blooming lilacs mingling with coal from a distant yard. Alexander followed, clapping a hand on his son's shoulder. "That's clever work, lad. Reminds me of my first sketches, before the world tried to derail us." Samuel grinned, wiping grease from his hands. "Papa, with your lines and my ideas, we could connect the coasts without a single breakdown. No more Langfords to sabotage." The mention stirred old echoes, but lightly now, like a train whistle fading into memory. Elizabeth watched her family, heart swelling. Society had shifted around them, women's voices rising in suffrage parlours, reforms rippling through the elite circles they now navigated with ease. She led the Voss Foundation, funding schools for immigrant children and libraries stocked with tales of exploration, her initiatives drawing admirers from Boston to Chicago. Invitations flowed once more, not as charity cases, but equals. Lydia visited often, her Boston reticule filled with ribbons for the girls, marveling at Elizabeth's transformation from seamstress to philanthropist. That evening, as gas lamps flickered to life along the street, the family gathered in the dining room. The table groaned under roast beef and fresh pies, silver gleaming from the sideboard, a wedding gift from reformed Voss kin. Clara recited a poem she'd composed about iron horses racing to the horizon, her voice clear and confident. James bounced in his seat, demanding stories of Papa's adventures, while Samuel debated rail gauges with Alexander, their laughter weaving through the room. After the children retired, Elizabeth and Alexander lingered on the balcony, the city's hum a distant lullaby. He drew her close, his arm around her waist, the same protective gesture from Philadelphia nights, long past. 10 years, he murmured, lips brushing her temple, and every day I thank fate for bringing you back to me. You raised our heir alone, built this strength. I went half mad learning of it, but you've made us whole. She leaned into him, the locket, now engraved with their children's initials, warm against her skin. We did it together in the end. Love like ours doesn't vanish, it rebuilds, stronger. Below, Samuel emerged to stargaze, Clara trailing with a notebook, James scampering after. The family, expanded and unbreakable, gazed at the same velvet sky. In the distance, a locomotive whistled, pulling toward unseen frontiers. Their legacy rolled on, rails of steel, bonds of blood, a future unchained. As the stars wheeled above the Voss brownstone that fateful night in 1897, Elizabeth Voss reflected on the unyielding path that had led them here. 10 years had not dimmed the fire of their trials, but rather honed it into a beacon for others lost in the Gilded Age's relentless grind. From the ashes of abandonment and betrayal, they had forged not just a family, but a testament to resilience, the quiet power of a woman who raised an heir alone, the redemption of a magnate humbled by fate. Alexander's arm tightened around her waist, a silent vow renewed, while their children's voices drifted up from the garden, weaving dreams into the night air. What lessons linger in their story? First, that love, tested by silence and scandal, endures when rebuilt on truth and equality. Elizabeth's solitary years taught her that strength blooms in isolation, turning needle and thread into weapons against despair. Alexander's madness upon learning of Samuel, that raw, unraveling grief, reminded us that even empires crumble without the heart's anchor, and Langford's fall, a stark warning. Greed devours its own, leaving only echoes of envy in the dust, yet triumph whispers louder. Choose agency over victimhood. Expose shadows with light, whether through a letter or a legacy of schools and fair rails. In a world of iron tracks and whispered fortunes, honor binds tighter than gold. Their family, expanded and unbreakable, stands as proof. What vanishes in storm can return, transformed, to claim the horizon. If this tale of vanished loves and reclaimed heirs stirred your soul, drop a comment below, share what moved you most, and write the word rails to prove you journeyed to the end. Your words fuel more stories like this, spreading the spark across cities and coasts. Check the cards for similar epics of gilded intrigue. Hit play and let the next adventure pull you forward. Until then, remember, every derailment leads to a stronger line ahead.